Right now, you have $1,000 sitting somewhere it shouldn't be. Maybe it's parked in a checking account. Maybe it's tucked inside a savings app you forgot you even opened. You've probably already searched for what to do with it. And you've probably found 40 different answers, all shouting over each other. Buy this stock, buy that coin, pay off debt, just save it. But what if none of those answers are actually the point? Here's what nobody's telling you. This was never a money question. It's an engineering question. Every stable structure starts with a blueprint, not a guess. A bridge doesn't get built because someone felt excited about steel that week. It gets built because someone calculated load, tension, and failure points long before the first beam went up. So why would your first $1,000 get less planning than a bridge? Nobody hands a bridge engineer a vague feeling and asks them to start welding. They hand them a plan, tested against every way it could fail. Your money deserves that same standard, even at $1,000, because the habits you build at $1,000 are the exact same habits that will still be running the show at $100,000. Forget the stock tips for a second. Forget the hype. What you're about to see isn't a prediction, it's a blueprint. And like any blueprint, it starts with the foundation, not the roof. Here's the uncomfortable part first. Are you carrying high-interest debt right now? A credit card sitting above 20% counts. If so, that debt is the real emergency, not your next investment. Paying it off is a guaranteed return. Where else in this entire video will you find a guaranteed 20%? Nowhere. So if that applies to you, the blueprint waits. Debt gets cleared first. That's not caution talking. That's just arithmetic. Assuming that box is already checked, the next foundation piece is smaller. A cushion. Not your full emergency fund, just enough so one unexpected repair doesn't force you to sell investments at the worst possible moment. Engineers call this a safety margin. You're about to build the exact same thing, just with a bank account instead of steel. One more foundation detail, easy to miss. Where you hold this money matters almost as much as what you put it in. Many countries offer tax-advantaged accounts built exactly for long-term investing. Accounts that either delay your tax bill or remove it completely under certain conditions. Before you open a plain, ordinary brokerage account, spend 10 minutes checking what your own country offers. It's the difference between building your frame in a controlled environment or building it out in the open weather. Now, the actual structure. Picture your $1,000 as a small building. What holds a building up? Not the paint, not the decoration, the frame. In investing, that frame is a diversified index fund. One single fund that owns small pieces of hundreds of companies at once. You're not betting on one business surviving. You're betting on the entire economy continuing to function the way it has, imperfectly, for centuries. Does that sound less exciting than picking the next big stock? Probably. Does it also happen to work better for most people? Also, probably. Here's why that matters in practice. Imagine putting the entire $1,000 into a single company. If that company drops by half, you're left with $500. If that company disappears completely, which has happened to household names before, you're left with nothing. Now imagine that same company sitting inside a fund next to 499 others. If it collapses to zero, the damage barely shows up in your total. That's not luck. That's the entire design purpose of diversification. You're not trying to find the one company that wins. You're building a structure that survives even when several of them lose. Here's a number worth remembering. Some call it the rule of 72. Take 72, divide it by your expected annual return, and you get roughly how many years it takes your money to double. Simple enough? At an average return of 7%, close to the long-term, inflation-adjusted average of the broader stock market, 72 divided by 7 lands just over 10 years. 10 years for your money to double, not because you did anything clever, because you let it sit. Run that math forward. $1,000, growing at that same 7% average for 30 years, without you adding another cent, compounds to somewhere around $7,600. Same starting point, same $1,000. So what changed? Only time, left alone to do its job. Now stretch that same $1,000 over 40 years instead of 30, the difference between starting this at 25 instead of 35. At that same 7%, 40 years turns $1,000 into just under $15,000, almost double the 30-year result. Only 10 extra years, and the outcome nearly doubles. That's not a coincidence. It's the rule of 72 again, quietly doing exactly what it promised. Every extra decade you give it early is worth more than almost any amount you could add late. But here's a number the industry doesn't advertise as loudly. Fees. Every fund charges something called an expense ratio, a small percentage taken out automatically every year, whether the fund goes up or down. Some index funds charge as little as 0.05%. Some actively managed funds charge closer to a full percent. That gap sounds tiny. Does it actually matter over 30 years? Run the same $1,000 through both. At a net return of about 6.95%. After the smaller fee, you end up with roughly $7,500. At a net return of 6%, after the larger fee, you end up with roughly $5,700. Same $1,000. Same 30 years. The only difference was 1%, quietly subtracted every single year, and it cost you more than $1,700. Nobody sends you a bill for that. It just never shows up. Where does this frame actually go? A reasonable blueprint for a first $1,000 looks something like this. The large majority, around 80%, into that diversified index fund, the frame holding everything up. A smaller share, maybe 10%, kept in cash or a high-yield savings account, your safety margin. And if you want it, one final 10%, set aside for individual stocks you actually understand. Notice what that last 10% is really for. It's not there to make you rich, it's there so you don't get bored and start touching the frame. If you do use that slice, use it on a company you could actually explain to a stranger in 1 minute. What it sells, how it makes money, and why it might still be around in 10 years. If you can't answer those 3 things, that's not an investment. That's a guess wearing a nicer outfit. Here's the part that turns this from a one-time decision into an actual system. What happens if this $1,000 isn't the end of the story, but the beginning of one? Say you commit to adding even $50 a month going forward, automatically, without having to decide anything each time. That single habit, more than the original $1,000, is usually what separates people who build real wealth from people who just made one good decision one time. Engineers call this a repeatable process. Investors call it dollar-cost averaging, buying consistently regardless of whether prices are up or down that particular week. You stop trying to time the market, and you let the calendar do the timing for you. None of this sounds thrilling. It's not supposed to. Somewhere, someone is trying to convince you that boring is the same as wrong. It isn't. Engineers don't get applause for a bridge that never collapses. Nobody throws a parade for infrastructure that just quietly works for 50 years. But that bridge is still standing, carrying weight, every single day, while flashier designs get torn down and rebuilt. Your portfolio can do the same thing. Because here's the twist almost nobody talks about. Was the real danger ever picking the wrong stock? Picking stocks feels like skill. It feels like control. Watching a chart, reading a headline, feeling like you spotted something the market missed. But decade after decade, the data keeps landing in the same place. The majority of professionally trained fund managers, people paid millions to beat a simple index fund, fail to do exactly that over any 15-year stretch. Not most years, most decades. So what makes you think you'll do better with less time and less information than they have? This isn't an insult. It's physics applied to money. A simple system with fewer moving parts breaks less often than a complicated one. Engineers know this instinctively. Do they add complexity because it looks impressive? No. They add it only when it removes risk. Somewhere along the way, investing got that message backwards. Complexity became the status symbol. The 10-tab spreadsheet. The options strategy. The trading app left open during work hours. All of it feels like effort. But is effort the same thing as an edge? Most of the time, it's just friction, dressed up as skill. So what actually is the real risk to your $1,000? It was never a bad pick. It's you, checking the balance every day, panicking during a completely normal 10% dip, selling near the bottom, then buying back in once it finally feels safe again, which is usually right before it dips once more. Markets don't punish investors for lacking knowledge. They punish them for lacking patience. You don't have to look back far to find a stretch where the market dropped 10, 20, sometimes 30% within a matter of weeks, and every headline made it sound like the end of something. People who pulled their money out during those weeks locked in the loss permanently. People who did nothing, who left the frame exactly where it was, watched the same market recover, because historically, it always eventually has. That's not a guarantee about the future. It's just what happened every previous time this exact panic played out. Think about the last time you tried to skip your daily coffee to save money. Did it actually change anything? The truth is, $5 a day was never the real threat to your future. The real threat is $1,000, given an actual structure, pulled back out 18 months later because a headline made you nervous. One mistake costs you $5. The other one costs you decades of compounding. Which one do you think gets talked about more online? Nobody makes a viral video mocking someone for staying invested through a rough quarter. Everyone makes a viral video mocking a $5 coffee. The math is backwards from the attention. That's the modern mirror this video keeps circling back to. You already have the discipline to resist a coffee, at least sometimes. What you don't have yet, because nobody built it for you, is a blueprint that makes the bigger decision automatic, not a choice you remake every day with willpower. A structure you build once, then leave alone. So here's the plan, laid out plainly. Clear any high-interest debt first. Set aside a small safety cushion. Put the majority of your $1,000 into a diversified index fund. Keep a small piece in cash. Want to explore individual stocks? Use a small slice, no more than you could lose without losing sleep, and treat that slice as curiosity, not strategy. Then comes the hardest instruction in the entire blueprint. Can you leave it alone? Because that $1,000 was never sitting in the wrong place. It was just waiting for its blueprint.